go back to the very start of your career, Steve, you joined Nottingham Forest as a teenager. How did that move come about, and were there other clubs interested at the time?
Yeah, there were, and probably back then, dare I say, that would have been late 80s, early 90s. No different to any other kid's sort of aspirations, really. Wanted to be a footballer, and the way it worked then was, as it is now, scouts would come out and watch you, invite you up to clubs at half term, summer holidays, stuff like that. I went to quite a few places: Man United, Arsenal, Aston Villa, which is my hometown club, who I support. But I don't know, just that gut feeling was Forest. I loved the place. They made me feel really welcome. Thankfully, I lived in Birmingham at the time, so it wasn't a million miles away. It was only just up the M42, and they had a great sort of past record of bringing players through and into the first team. So decided that that's where I'd go, and probably sort of justified my decision in the end. But yeah, great place, and had the fortune to be with Brian Clough for my first year, really, which was fascinating, let's say.
Yeah, and I read, Steve, as well, that as part of joining Forest, you were also at the 1991 FA Cup final. What was that experience like as a youngster to be there at Wembley?
Yeah, brilliant. That was my first ever FA Cup final, and obviously that was the infamous one with Gaza and the knee injury and the old Wembley. Yeah, brilliant. I think we actually went down as an entire family. I think Forest looked after us, gave us 4 tickets, my brother, sister, mum and dad, 5 tickets, in fact, including me. And it was amazing. And that's when, you look back at some of the games. My dad first took me to West Brom Villa when I was 6-7 years old, and just fell in love with the game, couldn't get enough of it. But actually now looking back and being part of that sort of infamous semi-final, it was, boy, a dream. Yeah, absolutely.
And you signed your first professional contract shortly after you turned 17. As you've just mentioned there, it would be Brian Clough's final season. What was that like to be, part of such a massive defining era for the football club, and to see it come to an end like that, with all the history and obviously the impact that Brian Clough had on the game as well?
Yeah, fascinating to be a part of, terrifying at the same time. You look back, my first year as a scholar or apprentice, what you call it then, had Stuart Pearce, Roy Keane, Teddy Sheringham, had some top class players, and they were all scared of him as well. We'd come in and you could hear a pin drop, and he certainly had that air of the aura around him of authority. And it used to be back then where you used to have 2 apprentices, you had to be on match day duty in the dressing room, so you got to saw the inner sanctum, and you'd be taking off the players' boots, picking up the kit, giving them water. Team talks were very simplistic, but get the ball, move it, keep it forward. He trusted the players, trusted their ability. The players loved him, even though they had that fear around him. But he was just a bit of an odd character as well. He's like some of the stories that you hear. I mean, I can remember I was injured actually in one spell, and I just felt the hands on the back of my sort of shoulders. He came up behind me and picked me up literally and said, "You're coming with me." And went to a shop in West Bridgford at the time, and he said, "Choose loads of magazines, choose some flowers, choose some chocolates." And it was his son's news agency in West Bridgford, and I did. And basically, he bought about 30 lots of everything for all the players' girlfriends and wives. And I had another story where, again, something similar, and I had to go shopping with him in Nottingham City Centre with his dog Del Boy, which I had to hold. And he was in his infamous green jumper and white shorts, and everyone's just looking. And I daren't look. I was just head to the floor. And he's just such a character. It's just a shame that it ended in the way it did. First season of the Premier League, and Forest got relegated, which was such a shame. And I wouldn't say it tarnished his reputation, but it's not the way he'd have probably wanted to go out.
Yeah, because I was going to say, Steve, what was the feeling like in the dressing room where, this legend, so iconic and held on such a pedestal still? But, obviously there's that pressure, and obviously football at that point where the Premier League had just come in, it was becoming more of a business, wasn't it? So how was that to see a man held in such high esteem actually struggling at the wrong end of the table? Was it quite a pressurised environment in that regard?
Yeah, it absolutely was. And you're right. I can remember Forest were the first team that were on TV. The Sky Sports era. That was against Liverpool. I think Forest won 1-0. Teddy Sheringham scored. And to see all that razzmatazz, all the bling, everything else, it was highly pressurised. And even back then, it was nothing like it is now. But cameras at training grounds, interviewers all the time, and it was just a travesty, really. And you look back at some of the players that they had, they shouldn't have. For whatever reason, it happens now, don't you? You see some teams get relegated with some stellar players, and it shouldn't have happened, but it did, and it was a pressurised hot pot. And I can remember looking back as a 16, 17-year-old, thinking I'm miles away from this first team. I'm, just wet behind the ears, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think that had a real negative impact on a lot of the players and a lot of the senior players, because probably a lot of them the first relegation, but also in that intense cookie, and then visibly all over Sky every week. It was a sad time for the football club, absolutely. It took them a long time to get back in there.
Yeah. And can you remember the sort of reaction when it had been decided that Brian would step down? Was that one of shock, or was it expected?
I think probably a little bit of both. I think some people thought, no, it'll never happen. And a lot of people sort of expected it, because he wasn't at the greatest of health back then. So a bit of both, but I think it was just the end of an era, a legacy. In fact, we've been there for such a long period of time, and people talk about Wenger's time at Arsenal, and Clough had probably been there a lot longer. So, and historically gone on and won Champions Leagues and everything. Well, European Cup as it was back then. So, yeah, it was great to be a part of it. Although I didn't see that much because I was an apprentice, but you got to saw an awful lot of him, and it was almost like the end of Forest. It was like the death of a family. It was, because the fans were crying, board members were crying. It was like, well, what happens now? So, yeah, shame.
Yeah. And we've had Paul McGregor on before as well. So this is the second time the Del Boy's got a mention. And it seems that Clough, he'd been there that many years, bringing his dog into training and stuff. It almost feels like the City ground was an extension of his own home almost. But as a young player then, and how Clough treated the young players, and as you mentioned, the family, do you think that helped you, having a manager that treated you in that way?
I don't know, because I didn't really have anything to gauge or judge it or compare it against. But, some of the things he used to do, after a match, win, lose or draw. I remember there was a phone call. Someone had to go, me and another lad had to go down and sing happy birthday to one of the director's guests. And we did. He'd give us 50 quid each. And he'd ask you to polish his shoes, and he'd give you 20 quid. And some of us had to go around and mow his lawn and pick out the weeds in his garden. And Barbara, his wife, would cook you breakfast. And some of the things you look back on, you're like, that would never happen nowadays. It just wouldn't. But you were able to build a very small connection with someone who was, like you said, held on a massive pedestal and people look up to. And often didn't know your name. He'd just call his son. He didn't have a clue who anyone was. But it's difficult because you just didn't know anything else. So that was the football club. And I was probably first step foot at Forest when I was about 14. So we'd had some meetings with him and a couple of things. But yeah, to be around him on a daily basis was a privilege, let's say. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you made your Premier League debut in 1996. And I think it's fair to say it was a bit of a baptism of fire. You faced the crazy gang, Vinnie Jones and co. What was that like? Especially in the tunnel as well. What was that like?
Well, I didn't actually know that I was going to be playing at all, because I'd been scoring regularly for the reserves, and there was always links. Well, you're going to be involved, and I travelled with quite a few match day squads, but never even made the bench. And back then it was 3 subs, so I can remember going away in the hotel Friday night, and Frank Clark was the manager who replaced Brian, and yeah, it was a team talk, sort of 1 o'clock before you leave the hotel. Frank turned over the flip chart and my name was up there, and I was like, I didn't see it coming. So, got on the coach, made a few phone calls to parents. Listen, I'm starting in that Wimbledon. You got no chance of getting there from Birmingham. So and then it dawned on me, Christ, it's Wimbledon, it's Dean Holdsworth, it's Vinnie Jones, it's Marcus Gale, it was like, Christ, okay, get your head around that. So not the most glamorous of sort of fixtures to play in, and I can remember, I do tell this story, I remember nutmegging Vinnie Jones near the halfway line, and I daren't call it because it was Vinnie Jones, but he chased after me going, you little, you know what, so, but brilliant, ultimately that was, I'd been on loan at Darlington a few months before, so I'd made my debut in the Football League and had a successful loan spell. But I still look back now to have achieved potentially most boys, every boyhood dream to play in the Premier League was, amazing, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and then a year later, you played at Highbury against the famous backline of Dixon, Winterburn, Adams, Martin Keown. Was that at that young age, was that a really good sort of barometer for where you were at for, the level of players that are at the top of the Premier League and maybe where you were at in your developments and the fact you were facing them?
It was tough, you know what I mean? Arsenal then were extremely good, and I can remember sitting on the bench thinking at that point Forest were miles off it. We were a team that weren't doing great. But to be at Highbury, the atmosphere, Bergkamp played, people like that, Vieira, that was the best team that I've probably played against, including some of the players. So hand on heart, it's one of those where you've got to believe in yourself and say, I'm good enough to be on the pitch with them. And I did believe that at that point. But also, I made no bones about it. I was also miles away from getting anywhere near them. I really was. But yeah, again, another massive tick in the box to say I played at Highbury against those types of players. So great.
Yeah, and as well, you were at Forest for a number of years. Really, what was it like with the different managers that you played under, and sort of what effect did they have on you as you were progressing?
All different, not all positive. A lot of negative ones. In one respect, it was great to be at a club like Nottingham Forest. I fell in love with the city, made some good friends. So a lot of the John Finnegan, Craig Armstrong are two apprentices back then who went on to have good football careers. I still speak to them. In fact, I spoke to them both today.
Right.
It was a great football club to be part of, great city, went up and down like a yo-yo club. But yeah, I look back and I think if I'd have had the support that players have nowadays in terms of sports science and nutrition and fitness, what would my career have looked like? Because we didn't have any of that back then. And, it was when drinking culture was still encouraged. But then I also look back and said, I also had some amazing times. Some of the managers, David Platt, Stuart Pearce had a spell, Ron Atkinson, Dave Bassett. I look back and I'm thinking, Christ, I've experienced, I've been around some stellar names of football and played with some unbelievable players, Stan Collymore, Pierre Van Hooijdonk, Brian Roy, Steve Stowe, these types of people. I wouldn't change it for a moment, but there's also that bit of me that looks back and goes, well, what if? And to give you an example, I can remember, I'd been in and about the first team, been on the bench, travelled loads, and Dave Bassett was manager. I had a good season. We got promoted back to the Prem. And Dave pulled me in the office about a week after the season. He went, listen, you've done great. Really like you as a person. Here's a new 2-year contract. And back then, there wasn't much negotiating with Harry. It was like, take it or leave it. And I'd signed, I think, before I'd left. But then a week later, Premier League money, I think back then it was like 15 million that the board had given him. He said, listen, I'm going to go out and buy 2 strikers so you can go on the transfer list. And I was like, I've literally just signed 2 years. And I think I was 22 at that point. And that was a big decision for me to stay or go and try and get some, real experience in games under my belt. And that killed me for a couple of years because I just got nowhere near the first team. I wasn't on a great deal of money, but relatively decent wages, and clubs wouldn't come near me because we're not going to pay you wages. So really difficult. I look back on it with fond memories and positive times. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because one of my next questions is the fact that, they had Stan Collymore, Kevin Campbell, Pierre Van Hooijdonk. And as a player who's trying to break through, as you've just alluded to, they were paying big money for these players as well. And it must have felt very, disappointing to feel yourself falling down that pecking order. But in training, do you feel that you actually benefited from the experience in terms of playing with these strikers as well?
Yeah, 100%. And I take a lot of, I give them a lot of respect because they all said positive things around me. With no doubt, I was holding my own in training, in the match day preparations, the 11v11. So absolutely. But you're right, in terms of those, Pierre, Stan Collymore, people like that, you're like, I'm just not getting in. The thing that used to annoy me was that we'd always sign a striker or two that I thought were no better than me. But when you go out there and you've played 50, 100, 200 league games, they had way more experience than I ever had. So I could understand it. But then it was almost like, well, you've got another 6 or 9 months to get your head down, prove the manager wrong. And quite often you'd get 1 or 2 that would say that, but you're like, yeah, but you've signed him on 3 years. Yeah, so you're always going to pick him over me because of the board and the money and the finances. And ultimately that was the way it worked out. But you're right, yeah. some of the things that they could do, mesmerising, even in training. I remember David Platt, even though he came in as a player coach, player manager, whatever he was, he'd join in training, and I remember some of the overhead kicks he'd score, and you're like, how the hell does he do that? And I was, although it didn't really end for me well there, because it was Platty that got rid of me at the end, he was a Villa player. So I was looking to him half starstruck as a Villa player, into Milan, Italian 90, all those types of things. But yeah, great to be around them, because they were brilliant players, they really were.
Yeah, and it's a squad full of talent. But what were the personalities like as well? Because when you look at the team list, it seems like it was a squad full of characters. What are your memories of the sort of camaraderie and stuff in the dressing room?
I can't say too much, but you're right. I think that sort of element's missing from the game now. You get the odd one or two, but a lot of people are very robotic, almost trained now in front of the media. And thank God, camera phones weren't invented back then. But the people likes of Mark Crossley, Colin Cooper, Ian Wone, Steve Stone, Stuart Pearce, Kev Campbell, Chris Bart-Williams, bless him and rest his soul. We had an amazing squad back then who nights out would be eventful, to say the least. Training grounds would be eventful. There'd be bust-ups. There'd be people hugging each other. There'd be tears. But I think those types of things make you stronger. And I look back, and someone showed it me the other day, actually. I think there's a photo of us celebrating on the pitch at West Brom when we got promoted. And I think it was Kev Campbell, Chris Bart-Williams, Pierre Van Hooijdonk, Colin Cooper, Steve Chettle, these types of players. And I look back, and over a period of probably 2 or 3 years, you've gone through an awful lot, but it definitely makes you stronger and gels you and brings you together, and that camaraderie and unifies you. So unbelievable characters and so many funny stories to tell if I could tell them, publicly. Amazing, absolutely amazing dressing room to be part of.
Yeah. And you had 7 loan spells, I think it was, in the Football League. But it was the one at Scunthorpe that caught my attention with how it ended with Brian Laws. Can you tell more of that story?
There was a few, actually, not all successful loan spells.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've seen Brian a number of times since, and it was just one of those where I was pretty much, as the story said, in and around the fringes of the first team. Do you want to come out on loan for a month? We've got 4 games. You'll play. I was like, yeah, great. I knew a couple of lads, Justin Walker and Lee Marshall, were ex-Forest players. I was like, yeah, great. I think the first game we played Bristol City at home, I think we lost 2-1, but I scored. I think the next game, I can't remember how that went, but I played well. And then we played away at Burnley, which was on TV. And Brian pulled me on the Thursday and he went, listen, I'm not going to play you this weekend because I'm going with 1 up front and changing the system, blah, blah, blah. And I was a bit cheesed off because I think I'd scored 1 in 2, played well in both games, took it on the chin. And then the team, I think we lost, but the team did okay. It got on. And then the following game, I think he went with the same team again. So Brian sort of said to me, end of the month, listen, I wanted to stay on loan for a further month. And I just was like, no, I don't think so. And I've come to play games. I've played 2 out of the 4. I'd have played 3 or 4 reserve games if I'd have stayed at Forest. And I went, no, thanks. I'm going to go back. And this was probably what you've read about and referring to. This was in the car park at Scunthorpe. And he was like, well, I don't think you should. And I went, well, it's my decision. I'm not going to sign it. He went, right, you've got the club kit on. I wanted to take your tracksuit off. And I went, well, I've got nothing with me. And he went, I don't care. And it's like he said, he survived or died. So I just took it off. I went, there you go. Chucked it at him and went, fine, see you later. So I just got in the car and drove home.
Was it just a case of being in your boxer shorts in the car?
Absolutely, yeah, that was it. So in the car park. And I was just like, well, I've got nothing else. He went, I don't care. It's club property. I went, okay, fine. Laughed it off. And then obviously that made the press and the media and it sort of snowballed at the time. But an infamous end. And there was nothing really to it. It was just a case of disagreement. I expected to play. He said, I want you to stay. And I was like, no, I'm not. And that was it. So a funny ending story, yeah.
And this was Brian Laws. And can you remember the next time you saw him and sort of what was said?
Frosty. Let's just say it was frosty. I think we sort of avoided eye contact and for a good few years, actually, because I was still in around the Nottingham East Midlands area. He was still around there. But I've seen him numerous times now. He now works as a mentor for the League Managers Association, and I see him at St George's Park. And it's one of those things, isn't it? Time heals. And I think we both probably look back regretfully at the incident. But it made some good press cuttings, let's put it that way.
And obviously, you were 24 when you did leave Nottingham Forest permanently. Did it feel like the right time?
Probably a couple of years earlier. I should have gone, like you're referring to
Right.
before. I should have gone 2 years earlier, but it was like you got a 2-year contract at a Premier League football club. You don't know, do you? If I'd have made a better judgment, maybe I should have gone, but you don't know. It'd have worked out then. So at some point, I knew that was it. I couldn't stay any longer. So away I went.
Yeah. And so you joined Cambridge, you were there for 3 months, then you were with Plymouth Argyle, sort of lost your place in the team there. I read that you were training with Exeter, but couldn't sign because of an embargo. And then it wasn't until March 2002 that you joined Shrewsbury. What was that like to deal with, that sort of 2 years of uncertainty where things just haven't settled for you?
Horrible. And it left me questioning, am I good enough? Should I be a footballer? And basically, it was a similar sort of circumstance at Plymouth. I'd gone down, signed under Kevin Hodges for a 2-year contract. Within 3 months, he got sacked. We were 8th or 9th. Paul Stewart came in. And literally within a couple of weeks, he just made a decision that I wasn't the type of player that he wanted. And he said I could go on a free transfer. And I'm like, I've just moved my whole life down here, bought a house. I've signed a 2-year contract. And he was like, well, that's it. Quite a rough Scottish, but it was tough. And we had it. It's got a long story short. We had a one of his first couple of weeks in the job. We had a media day. So first team against reserves, as you tend to do, it was on the main pitch at home park. I was in the reserves, and as those games tend to go, the reserves tend to beat the first team for whatever reason. I scored a hat trick, and he asked me to go into his office after the game, and I was like, great, I've changed his mind. I'm back in. And I went in and just said, you've embarrassed me. All the local media are here, the local TV crew. And he went, never step foot in this footballer club again. And I sort of looked and I was like, what do you mean? And he went, you are not allowed to step foot on these premises. I'll make sure you're kicked off. So from that day, that was it. Couldn't train, couldn't play. So for 18 months, pretty much, I never kicked a ball. I was allowed to train with the youth team, but then I couldn't because PFA got involved, and because I was a senior pro, I couldn't play with youth players, couldn't play any games. And it was probably the darkest moment really of my football career. But I just thought, and I know you're going to come on to this, it was almost like the light bulb moment, because I was like, well, what am I going to do? Well, if I'm not going to be a footballer, how do I pay the bills? How do I pay my mortgage? And what's next for me? And it was that moment really that made me motivated enough to start getting involved in education and courses and developing myself so I'd be employable. So never thought for 1 minute that would be the moment that my career path would go in a different direction. But really tough period of time that was.
Yeah. And even when you signed for Shrewsbury, that was only a short-term thing as well. But the next move is where it really seems to click, when you joined Hereford United, and you scored 38 goals in 74 games in the conference. What do you think it was about yourself and Hereford that just seemed to match up?
Probably a lot to do with Graham and the team that we had. I thought I was going to sign for Shrewsbury under Kevin Ratcliffe, but again, he went, you've done really well for me, but I've got players on the books. It was like, okay. Same old story. And I was like, Christ. And Hereford were in the conference. That was my first time out of the Football League, which was a stark shock and something I didn't really want to do, to be honest, but I had no alternative. And even back then, Graham was like, listen, I'm going to offer you a week's trial, which turned into a 4-week trial. And knowing Graham, the way he works, there was no expenses, no travel expenses. So I wasn't getting paid, but had a decent pre-season, scored a few goals. Richard O'Kelly was his assistant, who's gone on to work at Villa with Dean Smith and various other clubs. And Graham quite astutely owned the club, so he was chairman and manager, which was one of the most bizarre contract negotiations I've ever been involved in. But it was almost like a second chance saloon. There were a number of players there who were in similar circumstances with me, probably not as old as me, a bit younger, but had 3 or 4 clubs, never quite made it for whatever reason. And he just had this knack of developing, similar to what we spoke about at Forest, almost like unification, the team gel together. We're all in it for the same cause. Hereford, I fell in love with the football club and the city, although a lot of people think it's in Wales, it's too far, it's a weird place. And I loved it. I can't really put my finger on it, but a lot of players were in a similar position and we were all prepared to roll the sleeves up. We all had some real quality. and it just seemed to gel. Sometimes you get those combinations, those clubs where it all clicks, and for whatever reason it did.
Yeah. And I think, at the start of your career, it seems that you've sort of been a victim of circumstance almost, that managers have just had different players in your position maybe. But, Graham Turner was at Hereford, as you mentioned, chairman and manager for 15 years. Do you think that because he was settled in the role and was chairman, that just meant that when you were his man, that meant you would be his man for the long term?
Yeah, I think so. And, I look back and he couldn't carry big squads. Finances were tight at Hereford, nearly went into administration numerous times before I got there. And he, utilised the loan system particularly well, particularly when players got injured or suspended. So if you were a signed player, you were pretty much, we only sort of carried 14, 15, 16 signed players. So absolutely, and it did go well, but there's also moments in that when I hadn't scored for a few games, but Graham stuck with you. He did. So gone exceptionally well, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, and with Hereford, you were named player of the round in the FA Cup after scoring a hat trick, and it actually led to you doing the FA Cup draw with alongside Ian Rush. Was that one of the most nerve-wracking things you've done?
You know what? It actually wasn't that bad. It wasn't. It was again, a weird one. But do you want to come down and do the FA Cup draw? And I was like, what? Like, you just see legends doing it on TV. It was like, yeah, come down to London, Soho Square. We'll put you up in a hotel the night before, and we had a dummy run through. Oh, brilliant! I've still got a DVD of it somewhere, but that's cool, brilliant. Great time.
I was going to ask about this. It's a bit of a rehearsal, isn't it? Is it just so that you know what to do, how to show the ball to the camera, just those sort of things?
Yeah, so you don't make an absolute fool of yourself on TV. I think which is just a dry run through. You get the timings, etc., and where to put the balls, etc. But yeah, I'd loved it. A good couple of days in London. Yeah, great experience.
And although you were banging in the goals, Hereford unfortunately didn't make promotion in those 2 seasons, and you moved to Cheltenham. Did you feel that because you were scoring at that level, it was right time to sort of make that step up again into the Football League?
Exactly that. Yeah, I think with the FA Cup goals and everything, I can't remember my overall sort of goal tally, but I knew that I was getting some attention from Football League clubs. I was probably late 20s, first time out of the league, and sometimes, unfortunately, in football, it's a ruthless injury when you're in good form and scoring goals, particularly as a striker. If there's a club higher up the pyramid and it's the right move and everything sort of fits into place, then you've got to make that jump, because I could have got injured the following year if I'd have stayed. You just never know. So really desperately didn't want to leave Hereford. We lost in the playoff semi-final after an unfortunate penalty shootout. But I had to take that opportunity again. John Finnegan, who I mentioned before, at Forest, was now captain of Cheltenham, so I knew of their interest. It was just down the road. And again, a similar type of club. So decided to make the leap.
Yeah, and I can see the shirt behind you as well. I think it might be the one. You reached the 2006 playoff final.
Correct.
Yeah, and you actually scored the goal, but you were quite honest about it.
Yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't be. It's it's one of those things where just got the ball sort of out on the right-hand side of the penalty area, and I can remember looking up and seeing Coyote, Oddie and Ashley Vincent running in at the far post, and I just crossed the ball in, aimed for the far post. That was it. And they made, to be fair to them, and I always give them credit, they made 2 fantastic runs across the keeper. He sort of didn't know whether they'd get a touch or a glance on it, so he was rooted. They all missed it. Lo and behold, it goes in. So, but yeah, you're never going to stand there and go, "Oh yeah, I meant it." It's, of course, if you know football, that wasn't the case. So, but you can't take the claim away from it. It always says that I scored the winning goal, so that's it. So buzzing, yeah.
What was it like to go from that dark period in your career to then go the other way and to earn promotion? That must have been a really special time.
Yeah, it was. I mentioned before, part of the Forest sort of promotion celebrations, but although I trained with them every day, I hardly played a game for them. Almost felt a bit of a fraud at times, you know what I mean, being part of it, although the lads still embraced you and you were part of it. But to actually playing, a large percentage of the games, adding to the goal tally, once you're a senior player and you know that you've contributed quite a lot to the team and the squad and in achieving promotion, that was probably the highlight of my career. That was meant an awful lot to me. And in terms of sometimes, all right, it was a lucky goal, whatever we say about a cross. You scored the winning goal in a playoff final. So it meant an awful lot to me. It really did.
Yeah. And then in 2007, you actually went back to Hereford on loan. You scored a brace. You got a hat trick away from home at Lincoln. Was it important for you to return to the club?
Yeah, I mean, Cheltenham, the promotion team was great. The following year, League One. John, don't know, didn't really quite have the belief, I think, that I could be a regular goal scorer in League One, and brought in others, as that's the way football, it goes. And Graham, at that point, they were in League Two. I'd already proven the season before that I could do it. He's like, do you want to come back? And I didn't hesitate. I was like, of course, without a shadow of a doubt. And as luck would have it, on the debut, you go and score 2 goals and you get back into momentum. The fans started to get back on your side. And it was like I'd never left. Literally within a week, it was like I'd never left. Graham was still at the helm. It was brilliant. Honestly, I had a good end to the season there, and then ended ultimately signing. But it was just like I'd never been away.
Yeah. And then, unfortunately, in 2014, Hereford United, as was actually wound up. Now, there is a Phoenix club, of course. But how difficult was that for you to have helped Hereford enjoy, one of their better spells in their history, and then to see the club, struggling so badly just a decade later?
It's not great. I mean, it probably wasn't even a decade. God, it was, I look back in League One, we were playing Leicester. We beat Leeds. We beat Leeds at home. Going away to Ellen Road. We were playing some big teams in League One. Yeah, massively punching above our weight and getting relegated. And, but that season was vital for me because I scored 15 goals and almost proved, I believe I was trying to prove to everyone else, listen, I can score in League One in a struggling team. But, a few years later, Graham moves away from the helm as owner and sells the club. And I just think what a remarkable job Graham did. As owner, as chairman, he knew what the club could afford, what they couldn't. Everything was on a shoestring budget, but they couldn't afford to do anything else. And then new owners come in, have delusions of grandeur. We can do this. We can create this football club. Some of the finances and some of the salaries they were paying players were crazy. We weren't paying that in League One. They were paying double that. He was just ridiculous on 3- and 4-year contracts. So I think it's a bit naivety from the owners, naivety from the managers who came in, and yeah, such a sad period of time for them to have to reform and start from whatever league, whatever step they did. But thankfully back into a relatively stable position now. But from my perspective, they're a League Two side. They should be in there. They should definitely be in the conference as a bare minimum. To see where they are, it is a shame. It really is.
Yeah. And after Hereford, you joined Northampton. What are your memories of that spell?
Not great, in all honesty. I mean, overall, not great. But then it depends which way you look at it. I think I'm a glass half full person. I really do. And we had the experience of knocking Liverpool out of the Carling Cup, which it was back then, at Anfield. And, our sub came on, blazed my penalty over again. I'm always honest. But we knocked them out on pens, and we played. I played my part in we knocked Reading out away. I'd scored a penalty there, and highlight how many times you get to play Anfield. A person that's like me, probably a lower league journeyman, and knocked them out when Roy Hodgson was manager. Amazing, but I was at the back end of my career, and I was travelling from Worcester to Northampton on a daily basis. Just didn't work out. It just didn't. But yeah, another career highlight. But that was almost the moment where I was falling out of love with it, really. It became more of a job. I was looking at it, and I didn't have the love for Northampton like I did with Hereford or Cheltenham. And I just knew that my days were being numbered. So made a conscious decision to get involved in coaching full time. And by that point, I'd done my B license, my A license. I'd done the league managers course. I was reserve coach at Hereford United. I'd done some coaching at Cheltenham. I was doing stuff with the youth team at Northampton. So I was ready. I was ready for the next stage, to be honest with you. So ended up calling it a day there, within the Football League, really.
Yeah. And then you say, you were travelling to Northampton. So, you found a club a little closer, and you returned to Gloucestershire with Forest Green Rovers. And that is then when the coaching journey really began for you.
Yeah. Do you know what? funnily enough, when I was at Northampton, we played Forest Green in the FA Cup away, and I scored 2. It was probably October, November. So the manager, Dave Hockaday, at the time, he went on to become the Leeds manager years later. He, wanted to sign me, and I was like, I was at Northampton at the time, so never going to happen. But when I walked away at Christmas time, I started up a full-time coaching role at Hartpury College, which a lot of people haven't heard, but aligned and akin to Loughborough, Northampton University, Great Britain University champions, England college champions, a real powerhouse of football in the FE sector. So I started in January full time, and Forest Green, lo and behold, used to train at Hartpury, use their facilities. So I was prepared to just walk away from football. That was it. And it was just the chance of me and Dave Hockaday passed in the corridor, and he was like, Steve, and I went, Dave. He was like, well, what are you doing? And I went, I've started here. And he was like, really? And he said, well, we're part-time. We train Tuesday and a Thursday night. Do you think you can manage that and play for us on a Saturday? And I was like, well, actually, yeah, I probably could. And I've probably still got that competitive element in me. That would be quite a clever way to transition rather than, that's it. Just go part-time and continue playing. So that's what I did for the remainder of that season. Me and Dave didn't see eye to eye, let's put it that way. I wasn't prepared to do some of the things that he did. So I definitely thought, right, the summer, that's it. Packing away the boots, that I'm done. But then Kidderminster Harriers rang me, and Steve Burr was a manager, and he was like, listen, Steve, I really rate you. Do you fancy playing? And I was like, listen, I can't. They were full-time, and I said, I've got this full-time job, blah, blah, blah. And he went, well, listen, at your age, he said, I'd like you to come in as coach and coach a couple of sessions, and could you train 1 day a week? And I was scratching, can I get away with this? How can I make this work? And so I did. So that was that for the next couple of years as well, trying to combine the two of them.
Yeah. And you were player coach, and at one point, that Kidderminster were bottom, and you basically took them to second in the league. For a young coach, what is it that you felt you changed to see such an incredible turnaround?
It was difficult times, because I think Steve thought at one point, that's it, jobs and results don't lie, do they? You end up getting the bullet in the heave-ho. So I think he was pretty close to getting the bullet, but he pulled me in and just said, listen, not effectively, I need your help, but you know your stuff. You've been around the game 25 years. You're highly qualified. Can you help? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we did anything. We didn't do anything unto the ordinary. We just got the team a little bit more organised, spoke to them as human beings and professionals. I started to take more of the attacking play. I don't know, and it just seemed to work. I think the players just respected it. I think it was nice to have a different voice rather than Steve and Gary at the time. And I think it was just combination. Me and Steve clicked and got on really well. A couple of good results, a couple of positive results. But I don't think any of us thought we'd make that trajectory from that position to second. Far from it, no.
Yeah. You did say before you were really honest. I was expecting you to say, oh, well, we changed this tactic and we did this. But sometimes it's just a different face, isn't it? And a different message, different instruction, and it just clicks sometimes.
It was exactly that. And yeah, listen, we did tweak a few things with the playing styles. One of the things we did with Marvin Johnson at the time, who's now at Sheffield Wednesday, we played with almost a 4-4-2, but with a lopsided 3. So we just left him as a free player, and teams couldn't handle him, because back then he was unbelievably quick. Not quite sure he knew what he was doing with it at the times, but they couldn't mark him because we just leave him free. So the 3 players in midfield particularly had to do an unbelievable hard-working job of letting him have a free role. And it didn't work every game, but teams would struggle with it. I look back and recruitment-wise, Emile Matt, who's now still playing at Walsall, went to score a load of goals. Carl Storer became captain of Cheltenham when they got promoted. Lee Vaughan. We had some great players, Josh Gowling, who went on to have some good careers, Mickey Dimitri off the back of it. So I think we got the recruitment right. But we just had a good set of lads, and we got them more organised and connected with each other. I think that was simply it. It really was.
Yeah. And from there, you became a coach educator with the PFA. Obviously, you'd already sort of transitioned into that coaching, so that must have been a great next step to take.
Yeah, it was. I think a lot of that was a result of Steve going from Kidderminster. Ultimately, he ended up getting the sack. The board changed, personnel changed. I didn't really see eye to eye with the people there, but I was still in my role at Hartpury. So it was like, well, where do we go next? And as a player, I was on the management committee of the PFA for 6 or 7 years, understood the organisation, how it worked, its departments, and I knew that the PFA coaching department was a fantastic department and organisation. You know, working for the players' unit, it would develop me without a shadow of a doubt. So, went for the job. Fortunately, got it. I was already doing some level 1 and level 2 tutoring locally for the county FA, so I'd got some tutoring experience. And you know, predominantly the role back then was delivering level 2s to scholars at football clubs, but UEFA Bs and getting around senior players, and seeing the educational side definitely developed me as a football coach, because you don't often think about that. You really don't. It's all about the results. But loved it. Loved every single moment of the PFA, and worked with some fantastic people and staff.
Yeah, and in that role, I've read that you worked with Leighton Baines, Jack Wiltshire, Stuart Downen, Emile Heskey, Jermain Defoe. Really big names in the Premier League. It must have been really interesting to see their different sort of coaching philosophies and personalities. Because they've all been at different clubs but achieved their own success.
Yeah, and it's not always the big hitters. You're working with professionals at every level, at every club, and they've all got their own vision, philosophy, ideas, the way the game should be played. And fascinating. Sometimes you just get a tactics board out and that's it, and you can just be there for hours because people are talking about, well, this game. And I remember sitting down with I think it was Wayne Rooney at one point, and he was talking about some of the famous games that Man United had played against Chelsea and Barcelona, and well, Barcelona were doing this, and I'm just sitting there like a fan, just like, oh, this is brilliant. All this gold dust stuff, it really is. And but yeah, it's not always about the big hitters. I think I'm proud of the job I do, because basically it's helping people. All I want to do is help people, whether that's people going from a level 2 to UEFA B to an A license, a pro license. It doesn't matter. But the longer I've done the job now, people have started to make some real indentations in the coaching journey and gone into management, and it's brilliant to have played a small part of that. And I just love the game. I think I've got something to offer with my experiences, etc. But to just be around football people every day, I just thank my lucky stars. I always wanted to stay and get in the game in some capacity, and I'm thankful I have.
Yeah, and I also read you had the opportunity to be in a bar with the England manager, and you were working out formations with beer bottles.
Well, I'm not quite sure where that came from. I've heard that before, but the bar at St George's Park often gets hit, and it is talking about tactic shapes, stuff like this, and quite often that it's the only place you can go for a break out of the classrooms and stuff and the hotel rooms. But I'm not sure where that came from, to be honest. But again, I'm privileged to be in the position I am and to get around people like that. So yeah, thank my lucky stars.
Yeah. And what's it been like to work with Gareth Southgate and to see him develop as a national team manager?
Well, I'm a big fan of his, big supporter. I probably have to say that because I work for the FA, but I genuinely am. And I think I came across Gareth when I was doing the PFA role. I mean, for years and years, obviously known of him, again, former Aston Villa player, so hold him in high esteem already. But yeah, I ended up staying in the same hotel with him when I was doing a study visit on the European Championships in France in 2016. And we spent a fair bit of time talking about the game and different countries, and he was reporting for the FA back in his development position back at the time, and then went on to the 21s, and then now got the senior job. And I'm a huge admirer of his. I think since 1966 he's the most successful manager we've had. Hasn't won anything, granted, but taken us to a final and a semi-final, and that hasn't happened for years and years. I can vividly remember Italia 90 and us getting to the semi-final and losing on pens to Germany. I can remember that. I can remember the unfortunate shootout that Gareth himself missed. But I think you'll struggle to find someone that's as polished as he is in every single aspect. He's one of the problems those former international players you mentioned before is that they didn't like coming away on international duty. They detested it. They didn't like the way it was ran, the managers, the strict regime. Somehow he has now amalgamated the players together. St George's has become a home of football. They look forward to it now. And he's got to take a large amount of credit for that. The way he talks to the media, I mean, some of the media interviews, he gets asked more about non-football stuff than he does football. What do you think about, the war in Afghanistan or the the working for homes crisis, or it's crazy that some of the stuff he gets asked. And I think people will miss him when he's gone. And I don't know when he's going to go, whether it's after this summer or not. But I think for what he's done for the senior team, and never alone the FA organisation, I think he's done it, and he deserves a massive amount of praise.
Yeah, because we're going to say as well, probably more than a decade ago now, when Germany was sort of dominating in Spain, that you would read articles about, the English way. What are we about? What do we need to do? And I'm sure that you've probably seen the huge work that's gone in to put England where they are now with so many talented players in the squad.
Yeah, and it's not easy, is it? I mean, historically, that playing percentage never changes. It's on average from 27 to 33% of the Premier League are English players. Yeah. You've got a third at best, and the Premier League is the best league in the world. I think everyone says that, but it's only the best league because we've got so many top-class foreign players. But then obviously that has a negative effect on the national team. So, but again, we have got a really talented squad. It's a young squad now, and I think we all hope we go on to achieve something this summer. But I think what he will do if he does go then is provide the foundations for the next manager, because the likes of, Christ, Bellingham, Saka, Rashford, people like that, a young defender, they're going to have them to work with for 5 or 10 years. I think we've been able to develop those. And it's not just the FA that deserves credit. Those types of players have got to take, a massive amount of credit from the club coaches that are working with them on a daily basis. So, but I think we're in a really strong position.
Yeah. And you said earlier that you were an Aston Villa fan, so you're clearly a lover of football as well as played it. So what was it like to work at a World Cup?
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, that's one of the benefits of the PFA, European Championship, going to the World Cup and the World Cup final. I was chatting to someone today, and I think I have to pinch myself sometimes. I really do, where football's allowed me to go to experience, to achieve. Unbelievable. And, a lot of the time it is great but it's bloody hard work. The amount of hours you work, you have to turn around reports, they have to be in 24 hours. You've got to travel to a next game, different flight, time zones are all over the place. Your laptop's out in the airport. It's not quite, let's just go and have a game, have a few beers, that's it. It's hard work to turn around the reports. But again, not, naive enough to know that I'm really privileged to do what I do. But I just love football, love talking about it. I just, get passionate. If it's in a coffee shop, if it's in the car, if it's on the phone, if wherever it is, I just love talking football.
Yeah. And so as we said, it's a bit of a mouthful, the senior professional game player to coach lead. I saw that you were in Belgium last week, to many different stadiums, meeting many different people within the game. Just, how enjoyable a role is it now to be having such an influence as well?
Well, I think that's the key thing. I enjoy it, but it's not about me enjoying it. It's more what impact am I actually having on coaches, and trying to develop them, mentor them, and prepare them for what's coming. And, a lot of our stuff is formal educational courses, but there's also a lot of informal stuff. So, going to Belgium, in particular, the coach I'm working with over there, I've worked with him now for almost 18 months, and you develop quite strong relationships and connections with people, and you almost become a trusted friend. And some of the stuff that they tell you is obviously very personal. A lot of the stuff that happens within club you can see, but also personal and private lives. And I think that's it. I think a lot of the role that we play goes unseen. Yes, we'll be at St. George's Park, we'll be in a classroom, we'll be teaching them about the game and develop them, but they don't see sometimes the phone calls we get at 11:30 at night when they've lost a game and they're on the way home on the coach, and the chairman's called them in for a meeting, or they've had a bust up with a player, or they haven't been able to sign a player and the technical director now wants them out. And, we're all over the place, fielding phone calls, text messages, it's non-stop. But again, I think you've got to have a love and a passion to do the job, because if you didn't want to talk to those people, it's so easy just to walk away. But thankfully, I'm in love with it, and I'd never dream of moving. So again, just keep repeating myself, but really fortunate, absolutely.
Yeah. And just finally, Steve, you said earlier that you were in Brian Clough's team talks, and that would be fairly basic. Now, 30 years later, it's very complex. Some people say that players are even like robots now. Do you think that now with the technology in the game and the innovations, do you think we will continue to see the game just evolve all the time now?
I mean, I'm not quite sure where it's going to go to. I mean, I've probably done Brian Clough a disservice there saying it was basic, but that's what he used to do. It was like keep the ball.
But that was football back then, wasn't it? The stats and everything just weren't there.
No, it was keep the ball on the floor. If you can get turned, and play forward. And it was that. Training wasn't pretty simplistic. It was. I think with the support, the sports science, the data, yes, I think it helps, but I think you can also be baffled by it. I really do. I think I look at the players now, and they are absolute monsters. They're athletes, the distance they cover, the high-speed sprints. I'm not quite sure how much more athletic and developed players can get. The PFA, my former employers, are now talking about potentially, going legal on the fact that players are now playing 60, 70 games a year with international games, and they're going to break down. And effectively, they're like Formula One cars. They've got to perform at the highest level, at the highest speeds, and the slightest thing goes wrong and they're out. I dare I say it, I hope this doesn't. I could see it going a little bit like the US sport. I really can, with a timeout, with specialist subs now coming on, and I can see that's the way it's going, because I just can't see the players performing and maintaining the way that they can for 90 minutes. I think they're going to have one timeout per half, or a drink. I mean, it happens now. Players go down with cramp in the 75th minute, and it's pre-planned. All the players come to the side. It's happening unofficially anyway. There's a drinks break on a hot day at 22 and a half minutes in either half. So stuff like that's happening. Sponsorship wise, the US, the TV, they'd be all over that. Oh, great. The breaks are sponsored by Budweiser. And I just hope, I don't want to take away the free flowing nature of our game, but ultimately I could see it going that way. I really could.
And I think from your answer and from what we've spoke about today, Steve, when you said if you'd had a little bit of support maybe when you were younger, it feels almost like the modern manager has to be a tactician, but they also have to be a counsellor, a psychologist. And would you say from what you teach, it's not just about football skill, but it's also about managing personalities and that side of the game?
Yeah, 100%. And I think even before that stuff, a lot of it's about understanding yourself. Players, former players who I work with, they've never had an interview. You just don't, because you're a football player, and all of a sudden you may be going for a manager's or a coach's job. You've never had an interview. So how do you even prepare for it? What are you like when you're under pressure? I talk to coaches about, well, how do you want to play the game? And quite often it's a repetition of a successful period that they've had. Well, I played really well in 4-3-3 under this manager, so I'm going to do that. It's like, well, is that the right thing, given that you've got this playing squad and the profiles are totally different, and the club culture and the fans want this sort of style? And a lot of it is just about understanding yourself and getting the best out of your players. Fundamentally, that's it. I mean, quite often you see now, don't you, managers will get the sack, unfortunately. A new manager will come in, and there's quite often an upturn and a spike in results. Why? It's the same group of players. It's just a different voice. So if they can perform under one manager, why can't they do it? And I know quite often and I know, you mentioned it, sometimes it's too long. The players get burnout. They're fed up with the same voice. It's a number of different things, but I think fundamentally understanding yourself becomes before anything, and knowing what you're like and having the right people around you. So if you're not a great tactician, for Christ's sake, get someone alongside you who is. And if you're a motivator, you can't have three people that are motivators constantly on at the players. You need to have someone who's a bit softer and can connect with the players. And it's like a chess game. It's not straightforward, but
absolutely,
sometimes it can be.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Steve. That was absolutely fascinating, because it was great to hear about your playing career, but the role you've got now, and it shows, doesn't it, just how the game's developed.
Yeah, no, it has, and who knows where it's going to go in the future, but fingers crossed we'll all be a part of it. Yeah.
Cheers, Steve. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Thanks very much, Elliot.